Hi, I'm Rowena. My brother-in-law said I was too emotional to manage the family estate, so he filed a lawsuit to cut me out. Then they forged my signature, sold my mother's house without telling me, held a vineyard dinner celebrating family unity without inviting me. And when I fought back, they called me crazy. But I had one thing they didn't: a USB. With every email they thought they'd buried. They built a courtroom to silence me. What they didn't expect was that I brought the receipts. What would you do if your own family rewrote your life and then tried to delete you from it? The day didn't feel like a trap. That's the part that stings most now. It was a warm Saturday in Sacramento, the kind that smells like overwatered grass and sunscreen. I drove to my parents' old house, expecting something straightforward. One last walk through the estate documents, a few signatures, and maybe, if the mood was right, a quiet lunch with my sister. Instead, I stepped into a performance already in progress. Darvin, my brother-in-law, stood at the head of the dining room table, like he owned the wood it was carved from. His voice carried just enough charm to sound helpful and just enough polish to sound official. He had papers, neatly stacked, some clipped, others in fancy envelopes with letterheads I didn't recognize. I nodded at him. He didn't look up. Isolde, my sister, gave me a soft smile. Not warm, just soft. The kind of smile people give strangers at train stations. I took a seat at the far end, the only chair left without a folder in front of it. "This won't take long," Darvin said, flipping a document toward the center of the table like a magician revealing a card trick. "Just a few updates since the last draft. Legal stuff, mostly language cleanup." I reached for one of the copies, but he stopped me with a glance. "Actually, these are preliminary," he said, folding the page back into his stack. "You were never really one for the legalese, right, Rowena?" That sentence hit harder than he meant it to, or maybe exactly as hard. I blinked. "I'd still like to see what I'm signing off on," he chuckled. "Of course, just procedural at this stage." Isolde cleared her throat. "We just want to keep things smooth, efficient. You understand." I didn't respond. I looked at the names listed under primary administrators. Mine was nowhere. Darvin. Only Darvin. I scanned the document from my chair. He had legal authority, financial management rights, and a line that read, "All decisions to be finalized by the appointed estate manager unless disputed in writing within 14 business days of notice." The room was quiet. Too quiet for the storm I could feel pressing into my ribcage. "I don't remember agreeing to this," I said. Darvin offered a tight-lipped smile. "Well, there was a meeting 3 months ago. The family consensus was that you preferred to remain uninvolved." "There was no meeting," I replied, sharper now. Isolde didn't meet my eyes. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded in my lap, and reminded myself to breathe through my nose. This wasn't a conversation. It was a curtain drop, and I hadn't even known I was in the show. I stood to leave 15 minutes later. No one stopped me. No one followed. The ride home was a blur of car horns and half-finished thoughts. It was late evening when my phone pinged with an email. Subject line, Distribution Protocol, for review. It wasn't meant for me. That much was obvious. It had been forwarded by my cousin, Amanda, probably by accident. Her message above it read, "Can you believe this?" The thread attached was between Darvin and someone from a legal consulting group. It read, in part, "She's too soft to fight back. Let's keep it civil and quiet. Makes it easier if she doesn't even realize what's happening." I stared at it for a long time. I read the words again, slower this time. Not disbelief, confirmation. Too soft. The phrase stuck in my head like gum on a shoe. I didn't reply to Amanda. I didn't reply to anyone. Instead, I printed the email, slid it into a clear sleeve, labeled the folder, Insurance Emotional. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone to vent. I didn't tell them they were wrong. I simply archived the insult for safekeeping. You see, in families like mine, silence is both a weapon and a wound. They think because you don't shout, you won't strike. But I wasn't silent out of fear. I was watching. I was listening. And in that moment, I knew something with terrifying clarity. They'd already rehearsed this play. The only part they didn't write was mine. They thought they were writing me out of the story. What they didn't know was, I had my own pen. He thought silence was my signature. He didn't know I was sharpening it. By the time I reached the downtown law office, I had rehearsed 3 different versions of small talk with Isolde. None of them included what actually happened. The building was one of those sterile towers in Sacramento, with glass that never seemed clean, and lobby music stuck on a jazz loop. I gave my name to the receptionist, expecting to be handed a clipboard or offered coffee. Instead, she blinked at her screen and said, "I'm sorry, Miss Carmichael. You're not on the list for today's meeting. It's closed client only." I paused. "It's a family estate session, my mother's estate. I've been part of this process." She gave a professional smile, the kind that ends conversations before they start. "I can check again, but it looks like this is a restricted session by request of the estate manager." "Of course." I took a step back, pulled out my phone, and dialed Isolde. Straight to voicemail, I texted, "Did you forget to loop me in?" No reply. Through the glass wall to the right of reception, I could see the conference room. Darvin sat at the head of the table, gesturing with his pen like he was delivering a corporate strategy pitch. Isolde was there. So were 2 cousins, a lawyer I vaguely recognized, and a notary. I took a seat in the lobby, across from a fake ficus plant and a copy of Forbes Women folded neatly on a side table. I waited 15 minutes, thinking maybe someone would notice. No one did. They didn't forget me. They erased me. And they weren't even hiding it anymore. Back at home, I dropped my keys into the bowl by the front door and immediately opened my laptop. I wasn't just angry. I was clear. There's a sharpness that follows betrayal. It burns out the noise. That's when the email came in. Subject: FW, Family Continuity Planning, Internal Notes. I opened it without thinking. It had been forwarded by my cousin Jenna, probably without reading. A long thread, multiple replies. But the one that mattered came from Darvin, time-stamped 2 days before. "Rowena has a history of unstable choices. We're just trying to ensure continuity." Below it, another cousin had replied, "Better safe than sorry." I stared at those lines, not confused, not even surprised, just hollow. In one sentence, I had been reduced from a daughter of the estate to a liability. No more, she's not interested. Now it was, she's not stable. This wasn't about disagreement anymore. This was a smear campaign. And the more polite it looked, the more dangerous it became. I hit print. 5 pages slid out of the printer. I stapled them and placed them into the same manila folder I'd labeled last week. Insurance, emotional. Then, I logged into the public records access system for the estate law firm they were using. No updates had been filed with the county clerk. No final transfer. No change of administrator. It meant there was still time, a window, however small. But something deeper had shifted. This wasn't the kind of neglect I had grown up with. The kind where people forget to pick you up after practice or leave your name out of the Christmas letter. No. This was organized, orchestrated, filed and formatted with footnotes. It's one thing to be the black sheep. It's another thing entirely to realize you've been cast as the threat. The next morning, I sent an email to my lawyer, the one who handled nonprofit compliance for my foundation. I didn't say much, just attached the forwarded thread and asked, if someone tried to remove you from legal proceedings under false pretenses, where would you begin? He replied with one word: evidence. That was the moment I stopped feeling like a victim and started feeling like a record keeper. They were writing their version of the story. I would write mine. I didn't just lose my seat. I realized they'd moved the entire table while I wasn't looking. If they thought I'd never set foot in that house again, they were almost right. It had been over 5 years since I'd driven up the long driveway of our childhood home. The front lawn, once obsessively maintained by my father, was now uneven, patchy in places. A for sale sign sat slanted near the curb, half faded and leaning like it was tired of being ignored. The lockbox on the front door made my chest tighten, but the key Isolde had mailed me last winter still worked. Inside, the air held the dry, musty scent of abandonment. My footsteps echoed louder than they should have, bouncing off walls that hadn't heard laughter or dinner table arguments in too long. Most of the main furniture had been cleared, but a few boxes still lingered upstairs in the attic. Boxes labeled in my father's handwriting, all uppercase letters. Taxes, 2009. Misc photo, R. Estate hold. I climbed the narrow staircase to the attic, feeling every creak under my shoes like the house was remembering me step by step. The light bulb overhead flickered to life on the third pull of the string. Dust danced in the air like pollen. I opened the first box that had my initial on it, not expecting much. Maybe old photos from school plays or holiday cards. What I found instead stopped me cold. A framed photo. I knew the event instantly. Mom's 50th birthday. The cake had been shaped like a vineyard. Everyone wore white. It was the last time the whole family had gathered before the inheritance talks started. Everyone was in the picture. Isolde, Darwin, both sets of cousins, even my uncle, who never showed up to anything. But not me. I stared at the photo, scanning every face, every smile, every raised glass. I wasn't in it. And not like, oh, I was out of frame. No. I had taken that picture. I remembered holding Mom's phone, everyone shouting, "C'est Pinot!" I remembered not being asked to join, because someone had to take it, and no one offered to swap. I sat down on a nearby wooden trunk, still holding the frame. They didn't start erasing me when the paperwork changed. They'd started a long time ago, when it was easier to make me the photographer than a part of the story. My throat tightened, but no tears came. Just a throb in the ribs, that old ache of being useful but invisible. I placed the photo back in the box, face down. Next box, taxes. Or at least that's what the label said. I shifted through folders and receipts, not expecting much. But wedged between two manila envelopes was a flash drive. Plain. Black. No label. I brought it downstairs to the kitchen and plugged it into my laptop. The folder structure was chaotic, full of tax return PDFs and scanned utility bills. Then I saw it, an audio file titled Row CO8. I clicked. Static. Then a click. Then her voice. Row, my mother said, soft and clear, like she was sitting right across from me. If you're hearing this, it means I didn't clean out that old box like I meant to. Or maybe I left it on purpose. Silence for a second. Then she continued. I know you feel left out. You always have, even when we tried to pull you in. But Ro, you see things. You always did. That's not something everyone appreciates while they're busy playing nice. Don't ever let someone make you small because they're loud. I didn't realize I was holding my breath until it shook loose from my lungs. You were never a backup plan, she said. You just didn't need the spotlight to know who you were. That's a strength. Click, end. I sat for a long time after that. The sound of the dishwasher I'd never repaired filled the room with a soft hum. I copied the file to my desktop. Then I created a new folder on my laptop and named it Not Erased. That recording became my anchor. Not because she promised me a stake in the house or the money or the titles, but because someone, at some point, saw me before I had to prove I existed. And when I closed my laptop that night, I knew. I wouldn't beg to be included anymore. If they wanted me to forget I was ever part of this family, they should have burned the attic. It came on a Tuesday. The kind of day that had nothing special about it, until it did. I had just brewed a second cup of coffee, still in my sweatpants, sorting through bills on the kitchen counter. My apartment was silent, the kind of silence that made every envelope tear sound like thunder. Among the usual junk was a heavier white envelope marked Certified. My name was printed neatly. No return address on the front, but I didn't need one. The firm logo in the top left corner confirmed it before I even opened it. Darvin's law firm. I stood there for a second, fingers hovering over the seal, wondering if I should sit down first. Inside, 5 pages, stapled, headed with official legalese. Notification of litigation, my name, in bold. The estate of Lorraine Carmichael, my mother, represented by Darvin K. Andrews, was formally suing me for interference with administrative proceedings. My eyes scanned the document, but the words didn't feel real until I saw them printed again near the bottom. Subject has repeatedly disrupted the lawful management of estate assets and communications, resulting in administrative delays and unnecessary legal costs. There it was. Their version of me, on record. I didn't remember sitting down, but I was on the floor, back against the fridge, pages trembling slightly in my hands. I read it again. Then again. Not to understand it better, but because I couldn't believe how calm the language was for something so brutal. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This was planned. They weren't just cutting me out. They were packaging me up in paperwork and burying me beneath it. I grabbed my phone and dialed Isolde. Voicemail. I called again. Straight to voicemail. I texted her. You knew about this? No reply. And that silence said more than anything she could have typed. That night, I drove across town to see Evelyn, the closest thing I had to a compass. She used to run a nonprofit that gave legal aid to women in financial traps. She'd seen what families do when money and shame get tangled. She opened her front door in house slippers, already pouring 2 glasses of wine. You look like hell, she said, setting one down in front of me. I feel worse, I muttered, dropping the lawsuit letter on her kitchen table. She skimmed the pages. Textbook. They're not just blocking you, they're discrediting you. I nodded. He called me disruptive, said I was interfering with the estate. Because you dared to ask questions? Because I exist, I said. She leaned back in her chair, folding her arms. You want to win this? I don't need revenge, I said, steady. I just want the record set straight, even if nobody else sees it. Evelyn gave a tight smile. Don't waste your voice yelling into rooms built to ignore you. You win fights like this with files. I reached into my tote and slid across the email I had printed weeks ago. Darvin's smug words about me being too soft to fight back. Evelyn read it, didn't react. Then she pulled a clear plastic sleeve from a drawer and slid the paper inside. Start a binder, she said. Label it. Weaponized silence. Every time they underestimate you, document it. That night, I spread out everything I had across my dining table. The voicemail from my mother, the forged email threads, the photo with me missing from the frame. I labeled each folder. Not because I was obsessive, because I wasn't going to be caught fumbling in front of a judge. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I started building. Page after page, sorted and cross-referenced. Evidence, not emotions. Because they declared war on my presence without ever raising their voice. They picked the wrong invisible girl to underestimate. I wasn't going to yell. I was going to document. The cafe in Davis was too quiet for the kind of conversation I knew was coming. It sat on a corner between a yoga studio and a dog grooming boutique, the kind of place that served oat milk as default and used reclaimed wood for charm. I chose it because it was neutral ground. Not Sacramento, not San Jose. Middle ground, like I used to be back when I still thought I could keep peace just by not speaking. Isolde arrived 5 minutes late, dressed like she was coming from a donor luncheon, beige blouse, diamond stud earrings, and that same gentle smile she wore when she wanted me to calm down before I even started. She barely looked at me before sitting. Traffic was awful. I slid the lawsuit across the table. No pleasantries, no lead-in, just paper. She took a breath, skimmed the top page, and looked up like she'd been asked to sign a PTA permission slip. I told him not to push it, she said softly, but he's doing what he thinks is best for the estate, for everyone. Best? I asked. My voice was calm, but the glass of water I held was trembling just enough to make the ice rattle. Isolde reached for her purse, pulled out her reading glasses like that was going to fix what the word said. You know how difficult you can be when you feel excluded. I stared at her. Isolde, they're accusing me of interfering, of causing financial damage. Well, she said, pausing as if debating how honest she wanted to be. You have been persistent. Not everyone sees that as helpful. So my silence was fine, I said, until I started asking for what was mine. She didn't answer, just folded the paper and pushed it back across the table. I didn't want to pick sides, Ro, she said finally, but Darvin's done more for this family's future than you ever have. And there it was. Not shouted, not cruel, just clinical and final. She stood, reached into her wallet, and placed a $20 bill on the table. For your tea, she said. Then she left, walking like someone who had made peace with the lie they chose. I sat there for a while, letting the cup grow cold in my hands. Not angry anymore, not exactly, just hollowed out. By the time I got home that afternoon, there was another envelope waiting for me. This one arrived by courier. No signature required. Same firm. Different tone. They were requesting a psychological assessment. Attached was a formal motion citing patterns of irrational behavior and poor judgment regarding sensitive family matters. I laughed. Out loud. Alone in my living room. They weren't just cutting me out. They were calling me crazy now. I opened my laptop. Folder by folder, I pulled together every professional review I had ever received, every award letter, reference email, every therapist summary I'd ever saved, including the one from 3 years ago, signed off after I took a stress leave from work. It ended with the words, "Client demonstrates high-functioning cognitive and emotional coping skills under prolonged duress." I made a new folder on my desktop, named it Mind Games. Then I called Evelyn. We're past strategy, I told her. Now we're in preemptive strike mode. That weekend, she met me at her kitchen table. She brought yellow legal pads, red pens, and her no-nonsense tone. Here's how they're going to come for you, she said, sketching a diagram of courtroom language. They'll frame everything as emotional. You'll need to be surgical. We practiced cross-examinations. She played the attorney. I played myself. Then we switched. It was exhausting. It was empowering. And somewhere around the third round, I realized something I hadn't seen clearly until that moment. My silence had never been weakness. It had been surveillance. Every time they dismissed me, I'd documented. Every email, every slight, every exclusion. It wasn't just personal anymore. It was patterned. And that kind of pattern? Courts noticed that. If they wanted to prove I was crazy, they should have waited until after I burned the whole thing down. It was just after 6 a.m. when I sat down at the kitchen counter, coffee half drunk and cold. The sunlight hadn't even reached the window yet, and the quiet of the apartment felt heavier than usual. I opened my laptop, the same one I'd been archiving everything on for weeks. Documents, emails, voice recordings, my digital insurance policy. The folder I needed was called Estate Papers. I had labeled it in all caps to remind myself it mattered more than anything else on that hard drive. But when I clicked on it, the folder was empty. I stared for a full 5 seconds, then refreshed. Nothing. Clicked again. Nothing. There were no files, no backups, just a blank space where my defense used to live. My stomach dropped, but I didn't panic. I opened my cloud account, checked the access log. Someone had accessed my folder at 2:14 a.m. I hadn't been awake. The IP address wasn't mine. I knew what that meant. Someone had gotten in. They hadn't just locked me out of the family. Now they were trying to delete me from the record. I closed the laptop, stood up, grabbed my keys, and headed out without brushing my hair. 27 minutes later, I was at the Elk Grove branch of Central Valley Credit Union, holding the key to a safety deposit box I hadn't thought about since spring. Inside, one flash drive, sealed in a Ziploc bag with a sticky note that read, "Only if it gets ugly." I smiled. It had gotten ugly. Back home, I plugged in the drive. The files were all there, Emails from Darvin about inheritance strategy, letters between attorneys, internal notes I wasn't supposed to see. One stood out. It was a draft document titled Restructure Strategy Final. Inside, in plain language, was a paragraph that read, Rowena Carmichael is not essential to forward movement. Her inclusion introduces potential instability. Reframe her as emotionally reactive. Discredit if escalated. They weren't even pretending anymore. They had a blueprint for erasing me. Later that afternoon, my attorney called to review Darvin's initial deposition. I'm going to read something to you, he said, and you're going to stay quiet until I'm done. I braced myself. Rowena had no formal role in any of these decisions, Darvin had stated. If anything, she attempted to insert herself improperly, causing confusion and administrative delays. Then the kicker. She's been struggling to stay relevant in the family structure since our mother-in-law's passing. I felt something in me snap. Not loudly, not violently, but with the quiet finality of a door closing. Not invisible, irrelevant. They had upgraded me from ghost to liability. Get the metadata, I told my lawyer. I want timestamps, IP addresses. I want everything. That night, I called Claire Morales, an investigative reporter I'd worked with briefly during a nonprofit campaign years ago. She answered on the second ring. I was wondering if I'd hear from you, she said. I need to show you something, not to publish, not yet, but I need a second set of eyes. We met the next day at a diner in East Sacramento. I handed her the flash drive. She didn't ask how I got it. She just plugged it into her laptop and began scanning. After a few minutes, she looked up. This is deliberate, she said. I know. You realize what you're sitting on could take more than one person down. I'm not interested in taking anyone down, I said. I'm interested in proving I was here. She nodded. That might be worse. We agreed she would hold the information until I gave the green light. No leaks, no hints. Just preparation. By the time I got home, it was dark. The city was humming with its usual noise, but I sat in the stillness of my apartment, hands on the table, eyes staring at the manila folders in front of me. Each one labeled, each one accounted for. They thought I stored everything in one place. They thought I was the kind of woman who'd break if you wiped her hard drive. If they wanted a clean slate, they should have deleted me from the story, not just the folders. I didn't plan on going to the bank that morning. It wasn't part of my strategy. But something had been tugging at me for days. This feeling I couldn't shake. Like a thread was being pulled behind my back, and I wouldn't know it had unraveled until it was too late. The trust account had been small. Just a few $1,000s left by my mother for household emergencies, the way she phrased it. I hadn't touched it since the funeral. It wasn't about the money. It was about what it represented. Continuity, inclusion, trust. I walked into the branch and waited in line like anyone else. When it was my turn, I slid my ID and account number across the counter. The teller was young, polite, too rehearsed. She tapped at her keyboard for longer than made sense. I'm sorry, Ms. Carmichael, she said. This account no longer lists you as an authorized party. I blinked. I'm sorry, what? She turned her monitor slightly, enough for me to see it without giving away too much. The name that blinked back at me under primary access was Darvin K. Andrews. I've been on this account since it was opened, I said calmly. My mother set it up for both of us. I understand, she replied, keeping her voice light. But the access credentials were updated 2 weeks ago. Authorization documents were submitted with legal counsel. Can I see the transaction history? I'm afraid I can't provide that without a subpoena or written consent from the current account holder. Of course not. I stepped out into the parking lot feeling hollowed out again, only this time, it wasn't a surprise. It was protocol. They didn't take my money. They took my legitimacy, my name, quietly, efficiently, behind forms and signatures. I drove home without music, just the sound of the turn signals and the questions I didn't have answers for. Later that night, curled up on my couch with a blanket and a dull headache, I opened Instagram. not for any particular reason, just to escape. But the first post I saw made the ache behind my eyes spike. A long table set under string lights at a vineyard I knew too well. Glasses of rosé, plates of charcuterie, laughter frozen mid-motion. Everyone was there. My cousins, uncles, aunts, even Isolde, sitting beside Darvin like they were hosting the Kennedy family reunion. The caption read, "So grateful for family unity." I didn't even get a tag. I zoomed in on one photo, squinting at the blurred edge of the menu on the table. I recognized it. It was from Hale Creek Vineyards, a place I'd introduced to the family years ago. I was the one who planned the first birthday there for Mom. I remembered how she smiled that night, said it felt like Tuscany. Now here they were, dining in the memory I helped create, staging it like a Hallmark postcard with me scrubbed clean from the frame. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I took a screenshot. Then another. Then I opened a new folder on my computer and named it Public Proof. Inside it, I dropped those images, labeled them Napa Dinner, No Mention. I created subfolders that night. Narrative manipulation, optical exclusion, erasure strategy. Because this wasn't just emotional cruelty, it was branding. They weren't just kicking me out. They were replacing me in the story, casting themselves as the benevolent heirs to a legacy they didn't build, but now claimed with matching outfits and sunset filters. I sat back in my chair, phone screen still glowing. They weren't just writing me out of the will, they were staging the photo without me in it. There was no name on the envelope, no return address, no stamp. Just a nondescript padded mailer shoved through my slot like a takeaway menu. I picked it up off the floor as I stepped into my apartment, still holding my purse in one hand, coffee from the drive-thru in the other. It wasn't heavy, just enough weight to mean something. Inside, I found a USB drive and a short note on plain printer paper. "You didn't deserve what they did to you. Use this when it counts." T. I didn't recognize the handwriting. No initials I could place, no scent, no smudge of familiarity. But I'd been around enough betrayal to recognize the scent of quiet redemption when it came. I didn't plug it into my main laptop. I used the old one in my closet, the one I hadn't updated since I left the nonprofit, the one that never saw Wi-Fi unless I asked it to. The files opened without a password. They weren't just notes. They were transcripts. Internal emails between Darvin and someone labeled L.A. Hart. Subject lines that said things like, "Confirm removal," "Her access," "Backdate this," and "IT cleanup." One stood out, "Erase her from shared access. If she asks, tell her it's an IT error." I stared at that sentence like it had teeth. My mouth didn't move, but something inside me howled. The timestamps, the names, the metadata. It wasn't gossip, it was proof. Not just that they pushed me out, but that they choreographed it. That someone had taken the time to plan my removal, not just from the estate, but from the narrative. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about the story they were trying to write with me edited out. 2 days later, I sat in the conference room of a downtown legal office in San Francisco. Cold, glass-walled, fluorescent hell. My lawyer, the opposing counsel, a junior associate who looked like she was still in student loans, and Darvin. He didn't look at me. Too casual. Too busy checking his watch. "Let's begin the pre-trial evidence review," their lead attorney said. I slid a manila folder across the table to my lawyer. He opened it, flipped through the contents, stopped, read again. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He turned to opposing counsel and said calmly, "We'll need to pause this session." "What's the issue?" she asked. He held up one page, turned it toward her. Her face didn't change, but her pen stopped moving. "Where did this come from?" she asked. "Authenticated email headers," my lawyer replied. "Time-stamped, extracted metadata, internal records from your client's firm." Darvin cleared his throat, still looking at nothing in particular. The room was silent. I didn't speak. There was no need. I wasn't here to make noise. I was here to end the conversation, because the lie wasn't going to collapse in a dramatic courtroom scene or some tearful confession over dinner. It was going to unravel in a beige conference room, one email at a time, one page at a time. I watched them fold. Not with words, with evidence. And when we left that room, no one said a word to me. No one needed to. They played legacy games. I brought receipts. They wanted silence. I gave them paperwork that screamed. The cafe was tucked between two office buildings, barely noticeable if you weren't looking for it. I chose it for that exact reason. Callum Pritchett didn't need an audience. Neither did I. He was already seated when I arrived, glasses low on his nose, flipping through a yellow folder, like he was reading the morning paper. I hadn't seen him in nearly a decade, not since my father's will was finalized. "Rowena," he said as I slid into the booth, "you look like someone who's tired of being polite." I gave a dry laugh. "That ship sailed a few lawsuits ago." He handed me the folder without ceremony. "I went back through my personal notes from the early estate meetings," he said. "This is from before Darwin ever came into the picture. Your father was very clear on one thing. You were to be consulted on all long-term decisions. Not out of obligation, but because, in his words, you're the only one who questions things without ego." I flipped through the pages, typed notes, margins filled with shorthand, and there it was. My name. Again and again, in the concerns raised column. Concerns about disbursement equity, about procedural transparency, about communication with beneficiaries. And Darwin? Not a mention. "I didn't need to be the favorite," I said, more to myself than to him. "I just wanted to exist in the record." "You did," Callum said, sipping his coffee. "They just thought no one would ever look this far back." Back at my apartment, I scanned every page, filed it into my growing evidence archive. Then, out of habit, I checked my inbox. That's when I saw it. A forwarded email from Isolde. No subject, no message, just an attachment. Inheritance draft. Final 3, TDF. At first, I assumed she'd sent it to me by mistake, probably meant for Darwin or their legal team. But when I opened it, my heart stopped. The document was a revised draft of the estate disbursement plan. My name appeared only once, in a footnote. The highlighted text read, "Remove Rowena Carmichael from immediate disbursement list unless mental competency is verified." No context, no justification, just a condition inserted between bullet points and tax notes. I didn't scream. I didn't call her. I hit reply all and typed 2 words. "Thank you." Then I forwarded it to my attorney and dropped it into the folder labeled Erasure Strategy. It wasn't a careless mistake. It was a glimpse behind the curtain. I was never meant to be included, only managed. That night, I sat at my desk, every folder and file open in front of me. And for the first time, I stopped thinking about defense. I began outlining my testimony, every name, every date, every pattern of behavior, not for revenge, but for narrative accuracy. Then I called Claire, the journalist. We scheduled a private meeting. No press, no leaks. Just a conversation. I needed to say the words out loud to someone outside the family system. This wasn't about court anymore. This was about truth. About proving that silence isn't the absence of voice. It's the collection of everything the noise tries to drown out. If the record didn't want me in it, then I would become the footnote that screamed. It started with a text message. 6 words that stole the breath from my lungs. "Is this your mom's house?" Attached was a Zillow link. I tapped it without thinking. The page loaded with that too familiar front porch, the same crooked shutter I kept asking Dad to fix. Now professionally lit and staged with ferns and throw pillows that had never been ours. The listing price sat bold beneath it like a dare. Listed by Bay Oak Realty, Napa office. There was no call, no email, no warning. I reread the listing, scanning for any mention of me. Nothing. I called the agent listed on the page. "Hi," I began, voice tight. "I'm calling about the property on Alder Lane. I'm one of the legal co-owners. I wasn't notified this was being listed. There was a pause. Let me check. Ah, yes. I see the paperwork here, filed 2 weeks ago. All signatures are in, including yours. I gripped the phone tighter. No, they're not. Excuse me? My signature's been forged. I never approved this. Another pause. This one longer. Then the voice lowered, as if unsure how to proceed. I'm going to have to escalate this to legal. You do that, I said. And tell your legal team I've already done the same. I hung up and sat down, heart racing not from surprise but from confirmation. I wasn't part of this family's story. I was the obstacle they thought they could sign out of existence. But they forgot I still had keys. 2 days later, I met her. Her name was Evelyn Marks, not my mentor Evelyn, but the retired admin from my father's estate firm. She'd found me through the nonprofit's website after seeing a local news segment about the court filings. We met in a coffee shop near the Capitol. You don't know me, she began, sliding a manila envelope across the table. But I knew your father, worked with him nearly 15 years. He was proud of you, said you didn't just ask smart questions, you asked necessary ones. Inside the envelope were notes, scans, and one document I hadn't seen in over a decade. The original estate draft. It was in my father's handwriting, scanned from the legal pad he insisted on using. My name was listed, clearly, under permanent consulted parties. And next to Darvin's? Nothing. A blank line. Evelyn didn't stay long. If you subpoena me, I'll testify, she said, gathering her things. But honestly, I'm just tired of watching decent people get erased because they're not the loudest in the room. After she left, I stared at the page until the ink seemed to blur. She didn't come to rescue me. She came to remind me I wasn't crazy. That afternoon, I sat across from my attorney in his conference room, handing over both the estate notes and the Zillow printout. They filed the sale without her consent, I said, and they used a forged signature. He didn't blink. We'll file an emergency injunction today. This isn't just fraud, it's asset theft. I want forgery added to the motion. It already is. By the end of the week, the listing was pulled. By Monday, 3 cousins had called me in quiet, shame-laced tones, asking if what they heard was true, if the sale had really gone through without me, if I really was on the deed all along. I didn't answer yes or no. I just said, you might want to check what else they've signed in your name, because this wasn't just about me anymore. It never had been. I was just the one who refused to swallow it. They were ready to hand off my childhood, like it came with granite countertops. The envelope was tucked between grocery flyers and an insurance offer I hadn't asked for. Plain. Unmarked. No return address. I would have tossed it if the weight hadn't been slightly off, just enough heft to be deliberate. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed, centered. They're shifting the story. You're about to be painted as vindictive. Hold your ground. No signature, no hint of who sent it. But the tone was familiar, coldly professional, clipped with precision. It echoed something I remembered from years ago, back when Darvin's firm still sent me client emails by accident. I could almost hear the assistant's voice in the cadence of the sentence. I didn't panic. I didn't even frown. I poured myself coffee and sat down at my kitchen table, staring at the paper. It wasn't news, just confirmation. They weren't trying to beat me in court anymore. They were rewriting the script so I'd never be seen as more than an emotional detour, a problem that complicated their version of a clean family. But they forgot something fundamental. I was still writing my own lines. That evening, I opened the journal my therapist had encouraged me to keep. Not the online folder. The real one, spiral-bound, soft cover, pages curled from use. I flipped back through entries going months, years. So many moments of doubt disguised as grace. So many apologies I'd written in my own voice just to survive another day of being the reasonable one. I began writing a new entry. No formatting, no performance, just truth. They called me difficult when I asked questions. They called me unstable when I didn't accept silence as an answer. They called me vindictive when I brought receipts. Halfway through, my phone buzzed with a message from my attorney. The first round of public record summaries are starting to circulate. You might want to prepare. I nodded to myself and opened my laptop, logged into my press contact list. I hadn't touched it in years, not since stepping back from advocacy work. But there it was, the name of a podcast I'd once guest hosted for domestic equity legislation. I typed, "Hi, Jean. It's Rowena Carmichael. I've got a story that might interest your audience. Not about policy this time, about legacy, power, and the cost of being quiet for too long." An hour later, she responded, "I saw your name trending. I was hoping you'd reach out." The following day, we met on Zoom. No makeup, no camera tricks, just two women in different chairs trying to unspool a thread that had wound itself tight around generations of silence. I told her everything, not just the legal details, but the emotional footnotes, the missing chairs at dinners, the silent group texts, the birthday cards that arrived unsigned, the kind of erasure that doesn't happen all at once, but slowly, with intention, and 1,000 little cuts no one sees unless they're looking. She asked me one question before we ended. "What do you want people to know?" And I said, "That silence isn't consent. It's just the space where truth waits its turn." That weekend, I posted a statement online. Not legal, not formal, just honest. I don't need your sympathy. I don't need applause. I need space to tell the truth, because they can forge signatures, but they can't forge memory. Within an hour, my inbox was flooded. People I hadn't spoken to in years. People who said, "I thought it was just me." People who said, "Your story sounds like mine." And for the first time since this began, I felt something new. Not vindicated, not even angry. Whole. They couldn't rewrite the past, so they tried to erase the narrator. But I kept the pen. The courtroom was colder than usual, as if the air knew something was coming. The walls had seen 100 versions of this story. Families torn apart by money, control, legacy. But I was done being the subject of their pages. I had become the author. We were seated before the judge entered. My attorney, calm and unreadable, handed over a flash drive to the court clerk. The opposing side was already shifting in their seats, sensing something had changed since the last session. The judge looked up. "Is the witness ready?" My attorney nodded. "Your Honor, we'd like to submit a recording entered under seal by a whistleblower. Verified chain of custody. Audio content directly relevant to character testimony previously submitted." The judge leaned back slightly. "Proceed." The speakers crackled, then cleared. Darvin's voice filled the room, smooth as ever, but laced with a smugness that didn't translate well in public. "If she ever pushes back, we'll paint her as mentally unfit. It's already in the paperwork. Keep it clean. Keep it legalish." There was no outburst, no shouting, just silence, the kind that echoes louder than a scream. The opposing counsel's pen slipped across the table, followed by a barely audible curse. The judge adjusted his glasses and cleared his throat. "Disregard any prior character references submitted on behalf of Mr. Andrews. This court will not tolerate strategic defamation presented as legal defense." I didn't flinch. I didn't gloat. I simply folded my hands and looked at the wall behind the judge, the seal of the court like a quiet monument to the version of justice I had finally dragged into the light. That same afternoon, while court adjourned for deliberation, headlines broke. Top legal strategist suspended amid estate fraud claims. Internal memos reveal forgery pattern at Andrews and Langston LLP. The ripple effect spread faster than I expected. An anonymous employee had leaked emails from other cases, all pointing back to Darvin. Pattern, practice, and motive. It was bigger than me now. When we reconvened, the final judgment was clear. I was reinstated as co-beneficiary of my mother's estate, awarded compensatory damages. The judge referred the case to the state bar for further investigation. But that wasn't the part that stayed with me. What stayed was the moment after, when the reporters swarmed the courthouse steps, microphones angled toward my face, flashes going off. I gave one interview, No lawyers, no scripts. They asked, "How did you do it?" And I said, "I didn't win by shouting louder. I won because I never stopped writing everything down." The quote went viral. It ended up on headlines, memes, podcasts. But I wasn't interested in becoming a symbol. I was just trying to be seen as a person again. That evening, I drove alone back to the house. My house now. The lock clicked beneath my fingers, unfamiliar and familiar all at once. Inside, everything was still. No voices, no echoes. I walked room to room without speaking, just touching. The hallway wall where we used to measure height with a pencil, the edge of the banister I used to slide down before school. In the living room, I opened a box marked Photos and pulled out one picture. Me, age 7, holding a paper crown, missing a front tooth. The one they had removed from the family archive years ago. I hung it on the wall, just above the fireplace. Centered. Framed. Permanent. No press. No applause. Just a quiet return to the place they tried to sell, without my name on the deed. They built a verdict to silence me. I carved one they could never rewrite.